Welcome to our presentation. This is MBA19, the coursework presentation on guidelines of handling USPs or unsolicited proposals in Uganda. My name is Matsiko Jude Benda, and I'm presenting on behalf of our group members whom you interact with in the course of the presentation. Our presentation outline will look like the introduction, where we shall define what PPPs are, and we also go ahead and define what USPs are. We shall go ahead and look at the guiding principles of USPs and the incentives that are rendered to the USPs, and also look at the challenges and the solutions that are faced by the USPs, and also look at the guidelines of USPs in the different countries. And this is where we are going to do our concentration, whereby each of the group members will look at the different experiences as far as USPs are concerned, and we do the recommendations. And after reviewing the recommendations, we guide the 3P unit in the Ministry of Finance in Uganda and do the conclusion as we go along. As everyone might be aware, public-private partnerships refer to arrangements, typically medium to long term, between the public and the private sector, whereby they come up to provide a service by the private sector with clear agreement and shared objectives for delivery of public service. On the other hand, unsolicited proposals are proposals that are made without a response to any formal request from the government. So it's just an initiative by the private sector who comes up and says, I want to do this, can we do it together with the public sector? Now, before we go into the presentation deeply, let us look at the guiding principles of USPs. Why should we allow USPs? And if we are to allow them, what are the issues that we should look at? One is the public interest. Is the public interested in this proposal? Is it in line with the plans of the government? And if so, then we can go ahead and look at the unsolicited proposal. The other issue is the value of money, value for money. When it comes to value for money, is the proposal that they are bringing on board having, or will it produce any value for money as far as the cost is concerned, its economics and the efficiency, and later on its sustainability. Of course, without forgetting the risk allocation, because with value for money, those are the areas that you have to look at. Then the other one is about affordability. Will the government be in position to afford the proposal? You might find some proposals are too expensive that the government cannot have. Then the other one is the fair market pricing. Is it the same price? If we went out there in the market, are we able to find the same price, or it is less, or it is more? Would like to go with someone who is offering a fair price in terms of its cost is very low and the benefits are also enormous. Then the other issue is about transparency and accountability. Shall we be able to account for the funds? Because one of the issues that do with USPs are to do with accountability. And are we able to come up with a good accountability system? And shall we be able to prove to the government that and the public that we are able to achieve accountability if we are to go with any USP? Then, of course, aligning of the PPP and the USP procedures. Of course, we have got to come up with procedures, and whether the USP has come in, we must follow the normal procedures of procuring a PPP and a USP. We go ahead and look at the incentives to the USPs. These will come along in our experiences because each country applies some or a combination of these in their experiences while they are handling USPs. One is automatic shortlisting, whereby the proponent that has come up with a proposal will be automatically shortlisted in the process of procurement. That is the benefit or an incentive that they are given. Then the other one is the bonus system or the bonus mechanism, whereby while they are evaluating, the proponent is given an extra mark or bonus point for the work they did in the initial stages of the procurement. Then the other one is the Swedish challenge, sometimes called the right to match, whereby at the end of it all, when the procurement has been concluded and the proponent maybe somehow has given something more, and there is some other person or another bidder who has bidded low. So we ask this person, the proponent, to come up and give us a right match. And if so, then we go ahead and award the contract to the original proponent. Then the developer's fee. This is whereby the proponent has come up with so many proposals. He has done the proposal, has done the feasibility study, and the project is kind of already finished. The government is now ready to take it up and start from where the other guy stopped, the proponent stopped. Now, we give the proponent a developer's fee for the work that they have already done in developing or coming up with a proposal. Then the other issue is the best and final offer. This is applied mostly in South Africa. Most of the USPs that are handled in South Africa use best and final offer. This is whereby the normal process is done. Then in the second stage, the proponent is given a chance to also, if he has been disadvantaged, is given a chance to come and give a better offer. If he gives a better offer than the other one, then he is taken up as the proponent that has won the contract. What are the benefits of USPs? These USPs allow the government to overcome challenges related with early stage project identification. There are so many activities that go into project preparation in the initial stages. Now, this work is now taken up by the proposer or the proponent. So this reduces on the time that is taken by the government to come up with such proposals. So that's a benefit with the USPs. And also it leads to reduction in bottlenecks, since most of the governments lack financial and technical resources to develop feasibility studies. Like we said, feasibility studies are too expensive. So if the proponent now is proposing to do the feasibility study, this is a benefit to us as government now. Yeah, also the USPs harness the private sector interest in developing commercially viable project solutions. In most cases, just like we said, in most cases the government may not have the technical capacity to come up with feasible proposals. So because of the expertise that the private sector has, they can use their expertise to come up with something that is tangible and viable, that will offer solutions to our problems. Then, of course, the other issue is about the increase on the range of potential solutions available to address infrastructure gaps. This is whereby the government does not have all the money to do the projects. Now, if these guys are coming up and saying, for us, we have the money, we can do the project, although you will come in and propose some amount of money as a commitment, but most of it will be provided by the private sector. So that means that most of the money will be channeled to do other projects or other priorities in the country. Also, it reduces on the debt burden of the country. Then the other very important issue is about the innovations. These USPs, most of the time, they come up with very good innovations, which the government, at the end of it all, may not be able to come up with. But because the private sector is well placed to come up with very good innovations, this is a benefit to the government. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of incentivizing USPs? Because we see that it could be an issue. Why should they be incentivized if they are to win the contract in the first place? And one of the issues comes up when it comes to the Swiss challenge. Relatively clear rules based on the bid evaluation criteria for each project, which do not require further analysis of subjective or subjective decision making. Because we are saying we are going to allow you come and we give you bonus or we give you a right to match. Now, at what stage? It is very subjective. This is a very big hindrance to incentivizing USPs. Now, since evaluation criteria vary project from project, the definition of appropriate bonuses is subjective and potentially open to manipulation. This is the very thing I was talking about. We are bound to manipulate these bonuses and we might end up giving a contract to the wrong person. Now, it also recognizes the value of intellectual property owned by the proponent. Most of the projects that come up, especially IT projects, have always intellectual property in them. Now, because you want to protect this intellectual property, these USPs, you need to incentivize them so that their intellectual property is what is protected. Then it also encourages unsolicited proposal by reducing the cost of the original proponent if unsuccessful in the bidding process. This is where we are paying the developer's fee. And so it encourages the unsolicited proposals by reducing on the cost of the original proponent. But also it requires potentially subjective analysis to agree on appropriate cost. Because at the end of it all, how much are you going to pay? It's very subjective. So you can always find a challenge in coming up with how much you're going to pay as far as the developer's fee is concerned. Also, it increases complexity of the procurement process. This is where we use the open book system of incentivizing the proponents. The procurement process is very complex and therefore it is a very big burden. Also, it reduces the government's control over the bidding process because most of the things we are saying are proposed by the developer. So the government kind of doesn't have a lot of say about the bidding process. And also it does encourage experienced project sponsors to approach with proposals as the proponent can act only as a transaction manager. So we can go ahead and procure the USP as a transaction manager or a transaction advisor of the very USP. Now we change his contract from a proposal, now we make him a transaction manager or an advisor. And companies often do not adequately access the risks associated with the project, which may be borne by the government later on. And also USPs may divert the government's attention from the intended planned approach to infrastructure. Somebody can come up with a proposal. At the end of it all, it diverts all the programs of the government. Now, negotiating with the proponent based on the USP in the absence of a transparent or competitive procurement results into corruption. There is a lot of corruption as far as USPs are concerned because the negotiations are carried out not in a transparent manner and even the process is not competitive. Yeah, and so unsolicited proposal increase the burden on the government and corresponding perceptions of corruption, which leads to arguments to prohibit them altogether. Now, the solution to these challenges is one, develop the minimum requirements for submissions, make sure that the submissions are meet the right requirements, and revamping the public sector capacity. You have to train the public sector or the servants and revamp their capacity in terms of their technical capacity so that they can be able to carry out good negotiation, and also establish a competitive procedure before and after the USP proposition to allow the project arrive at a fair market price. They also demand for quality, sustainability, and innovations from these USPs. Effective risk allocation should also be done through feasibility studies. Of course, we are saying at the beginning, the feasibility study is done by the proponent, but together with, in consultation with the government or the public sector, we should be able to effectively allocate risks in the feasibility studies. And of course, creating and ensuring that there is a transparent process. And governments can better organize overall sector development by initiating all projects themselves and can establish the public sector buy-in for future government. This is where the government now does all the feasibility studies for themselves and keeps them somewhere, and later on, whoever wants to do a project just picks up that and studies it and maybe improves and updates it. Now we look at the experience of USPs in South Africa. Now the USPs are governed in the National Treasury Practice, and this is housed in the Ministry of Finance, or what they call the National Treasury in South Africa. However, several public entities, including state-owned enterprises or government departments, have their own procurement laws. For instance, the South African National Road Agency Limited, SANDRA, has its own way of handling unsolicited proposals. Different, not so much different from the national government or the national treasury, but they all come up with something that is good at the end of it all. So what should the USPs in South Africa must contain is the proponent's name, the address. Everything about the proponent should be, first of all, clear in their submission, and identification of any confidentiality or proprietary rights. This is why we are talking about if there is any property, any confidentiality that we should be protecting. This is where we identify it and make sure that it is protected and it is not let out to the public. The name of the other South African institutions that have received a similar proposal. We don't want to be evaluating a proposal that has already been submitted in another entity, and they are also evaluating. At the end of it all, we awarded the same contract to two different people but serving the same purpose. Yeah. So a declaration of interest containing the particular set out in the standard bid document, and the declaration of the proponent's past supply chain practices. This is where we now look at the past experience of this proponent, so that we are sure that we are dealing with someone who has the experience. The USP must set out the following in terms of the product or services that are going to be offered. That is the concise title and abstract of the proposed product or the service. A statement of objectives, approach, and the scope of the project. Everything should be submitted and highlighted very clearly. And also a statement showing the anticipated benefits or the cost advantages that are going to be gained from the project. A statement that the proposed project supports the strategic and development plan. This has to be now aligned to the government strategic plan so that it does not deviate from the development plan of the country. Then, of course, the validity period, and in most cases, they give it about 6 months in South Africa. Now, there is no international standard of managing unsolicited proposals. The best approach, when allowing them, is for governments to have a rationale for USPs and documenting procedures for their management. Proponents should have the following: where to present their proposals, what information is required, and the steps and timelines for decisions to be made. The management process of USPs can be divided in 2 major stages. Stage 1 is similar in most cases and takes place from submission until all internal assessments and approvals are finished. Then the second stage involves a competitive tender process. Approaches tend to define incentives or benefits to the original proponent of the project. Now, in South Africa, when a proponent or the USP proponent submits their proposal, the government agency does the preliminary assessment. Now, after the government has gone through a preliminary assessment, the proposal is initially approved, and then they require additional information or studies are requested from the proponent. Now the proponent submits in the detailed studies completed and submits the proposal at the end of it all, and then the government does the final assessment. When they do the final assessment, now the proposal is complete and approved, and now the second stage is now to prepare the bidding document. After preparing the bid document, it is open to the public, and the public now tenders, including the first or the original proponent. Now the preparation of the final bid is done, and then they submit, and then the evaluation goes on, as we shall see. Like I was explaining, step 1, the private proponent submits a general preliminary description of the project. Step 2, it is reviewed by the government, and then if it is accepted, then the proponent usually receives a formal recognition, and then a detailed proposal is reviewed. At the end of the spirited period, the project may be approved for a competitive process, or it may be rejected. Now, step 2 or stage 2 of tendering and solicited proposal. If the proposal has now been accepted, the project moves on to stage 2, where a competitive process will be carried out, typically under the best and final offer system. Now, the best and final offer system in South Africa uses this best and final offer system, which is somewhat similar to the Swiss challenge system. Once the project proposal completes the initial assessment and the tender documents are ready, the government will now invite the competing proposal from other developers. The procedure continues, as we shall see. Now, the project is publicized in the official register or gazette, inviting proposals from other parties. The proponent has to resubmit a formal bid also. Then, step 6. Bids are received, evaluated, and ranked. The 2 most advantageous bids are selected in the first round, from which a final round of bidding will take place. The 7th step is the second round takes place, where the best final offers are requested only from those that have been selected in the first round. Now, at this stage, this is where the proponent, if he has been disadvantaged or he has not gone through to the next stage, this is where they request him to come and give his best and final offer. And if it is the best, then it is awarded to him. That is the experience as far as USPs are concerned in South Africa. Now let's go ahead and look at how USPs or PPPs are handled in Sweden. Now, something interesting to note is that in Sweden, USPs are not regulated and do not happen even in actual practice. In fact, in 2013, if you read The Guardian, the Sweden attempted to halt anything to do with PPPs. Actually, in the Scandinavian countries are like now experimenting the PPP system. And it is only in certain areas, only in certain innovative local governments. And the local governments, these are the very small local governments that are really trying to come up with the issue of PPPs. But on the whole, the local government in Scandinavia, they pursue public-private cooperation mostly prefer competitive contracting for public services. So these ones do not actually practice any USPs in the whole country. Responsible for providing most of the direct services, that is from primary, secondary, education, welfare for the elderly, child care, and local doctors' help. So they don't see, there is that tendency of thinking that if they can provide everything to their citizens, and they are very rich countries because of their oils, why then should they risk going into practice with the private sector? That is the reason as to why most of the USPs, I mean PPPs, are not practiced in Sweden. But of recent, the parliament is trying to come up with so many projects under the PPP arrangement. Of course, because it is very new in their country, they are coming up with a Swedish PPP model that they are trying to adopt. Different, but not so different from what the World Bank does. So in Sweden, the primary reason for using private partnerships are financial reasons for setting up public partnerships. Second, only small local governments, like I said in the beginning, are the ones that enter into public-private partnership. Because the other local governments seem they are too big and they have their money, and so they don't see the reason as why they should be doing public-private partnerships. So in Sweden, public-private partnerships were seen as agents for change, and that is why the parliament is now coming up with a proposal to adopt and coming up with the Swedish PPP model. So basically, the PP project is normally characterized by three principles. That is performance requirements, long operations, and maintenance commitments, and then private financing. So the Swedish local governments, they have done extensive experience of the performance requirements contract with complete maintenance and operation responsibility, which involves extensive and systematic performance requirements and operation and maintenance commitments over many years. So the leading principles of the Swedish PP model, they are proposing that should be provision. First of all, it should be provision of the service if it is to meet any requirements, and then it should be able to complete maintenance and operation responsibility and life cycle perspective. Final design and railway plans as a strong basis for procurement. Of course, the performance requirements for creativity and efficiency, and also looking at the financing and payment forms for the best social economic benefits. Then the other one should be efficient procurement, and then of course monitoring and evaluation. So it should be possible to immediately procure PP projects. However, there could be a potential for further efficiency gained through an extended analysis of contractual forms, risk allocation, and the division of responsibility in project and railway plans. Now, most of the PP projects that are proposed in Sweden are to do with the rail and roads. It is only the only teaching hospital in Stockholm, the capital city of Sweden, that has been provided under the PPP arrangement, and it is doing quite well. Now, to manage and reduce the associated risks it will be important for Sweden to integrate PPP projects with the government investment strategy, ensure a robust legal framework, including one on USPs, because currently they don't have one, and establish a clear allocation of responsibilities, and also empower the responsible ministry, that is the Ministry of Finance, to stop or reject any PPP project under certain conditions, or has the right of approval or on contract signature.
Hello everyone, I'm called SHEILA, NYEITEERA, and I'll be taking you through the country experience for the Latin American countries. Latin American countries include Chile, Venezuela, Puerto Rico, Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, amongst others. But our main focus is going to be on Chile as a country because it has been the most mature market for unsolicited proposals amongst the Latin American countries. This has been evidenced by the fact that from 1992 up to date, over 200 unsolicited proposals have been brought to the Chile administration. And these include, amongst others, 3 jails, 26 highways, 5 mass transit transport systems, amongst others, have been procured. Chile as a country has utilized 3 institutional imperatives for proper management of its USPs, and these are transparency, accountability, and predictability. The USP guideline process, the process that Chile has used to handle its USPs, is right here. And that is, the first stage is the submission of the proposals, and next we have the evaluation of the proposals, project development, and lastly, project procurement, all of which I will explain as the discussion unfolds. Beginning with the first stage, which is proposal submission. Submission in Chile basically has been centralized because Chile is a more centralized country. And with that, that means that Chile has developed a specific unit, which is the Ministry of Public Works. The first stage is the submission of the proposals. Submission of the proposals basically is determined by whether the government or the political system is centralized or decentralized. Chile being more of a centralized political system, it has put aside a central unit for processing these USPs. And this central unit is the Ministry of Public Works. USPs in Chile undergo the process shown right there, starting with the submission of proposals, evaluation of the proposals, project development, and lastly, project procurement. Beginning with the first stage, which is submission of the proposals. Its submission depends on whether the political system is decentralized or whether it is centralized. And Chile is more of a centralized country, and therefore it has set up a central unit, which is the Ministry of Public Works. And this is in charge of accepting and processing these unsolicited proposals. The private proponent first submits a preliminary description of the project to the appropriate agency, which in this case is the Ministry of Public Works. Submissions are made once or twice a year. There is a specific time window for these submissions to be brought through. And this has been done so that they can reduce the number of unsolicited proposals that are coming through, but also to let the political officials pursue other priority projects in the country. At this stage still, USPs are required to comply with certain minimum set requirements, and these include pre-feasibility studies, business plans, business models, your financial and your technical capabilities, amongst others. All these are very vital for the government of Chile to filter out proposals that are incomplete, proposals that are of poor quality, and serious proposals, and also to ensure that the limited public sector resources that the government of Chile has are spent only on high quality and solicited proposals. Step 2, which is the proposal evaluation. Evaluation criteria are set so as to determine whether a USP should be accepted for further consideration by the government, and also these are used to screen the appropriateness of the unsolicited proposal given the country's requirements and also given the projects that are in the pipeline of the Chile country. After a stipulated period, the Ministry of Public Works will give a response, usually assessing whether the project or that proposal serves the public interest or whether this proposal is within the strategic infrastructure plan or the priorities of the government. During this review period, the Ministry of Public Works also reserves the right to request for additional legal, environmental studies, financial studies, which the proponent is actually supposed to conduct at its own cost. It is important to note that there is a two-stage evaluation procedure that is used, and this has a number of advantages, mostly in terms of efficiency, which is efficient use of public and private resources of the government of Chile. The responsibility for evaluating of these unsolicited proposals is usually given to one specific government agency, which is allowed to have inputs from other agencies. These inputs may be in terms of expertise from these other agencies like Finance Ministry or any other relative sectoral departments in the government of Chile. Our third phase is the project development. This is a very, very crucial phase in this process. Yeah? And this is directly linked to the level of competition that you have at your procurement phase. Project development responsibilities are shared between both the public agency as well as the USP component. It is also key to note that a clear timeline for the project ensures that this unsolicited proposal project moves efficiently through our development process. The public agency reserves the right to reject the project if it is not in line with the public interest. And in cases where the Chile government has relied on the USP proponent to develop this project, the government of Chile actually reimburses the USP proponent for the costs incurred during this development phase. In order to guarantee the seriousness of this USP proponent, usually the government of Chile will request that the USP proponent submits a bid bond for its guarantee. Our next phase in this process is the project procurement, which is actually our last phase. And as I earlier mentioned, Chile is a more centralized country, and it is important to note that actually at this stage, the Chile government has introduced a centralized procurement system. A competitive tender process has also been introduced in Chile, and this is to ensure that we have maximum competition. Of course, competition comes up with value. And since one of our guiding principles for our USPs was value for money, this has highly resulted into creation of value for money from these USPs. For timely submission of these bids, the Chile government has also established a USP framework, typically dictating the time frame within which the private proponents are supposed to hand in their bids. Given these private proponents a number of incentives, which include a right to match, the bonus payments, as well as automatic shortlisting. Competitive tendering of USPs is also used in Chile so as to help strengthen the negotiating position of the public agency. And also, since competition comes with value, this has created value for money. These proposals are then reviewed, usually through negotiations between the private proponents as well as the government Ministry of Public Works. And after a stipulated time period, the project could be either rejected or it could be accepted. If it is rejected, that means that the private proponent would then have to resubmit a modified version. These proposals are then reviewed, and this is done through negotiations with the Ministry of Public Works as well as the private proponents. After a specified timeline, the project could be accepted or it could be rejected. And should this project be rejected, the private proponent then reserves the right to resubmit a modified version of that project, or however, even the government of Chile is allowed to use this concept in a public bid, but usually after a specific time period of 3 years. Here are some of the best practices in unsolicited proposal management in the country of Chile. First, we have the minimum submission requirements. Chile as a government has introduced very stringent and very targeted requirements that it requires from the private proponents. And this is an aim achieving very good proposals submitted, filtering out poorly developed proposals, as well as reducing the number of proposals that have been received because the numbers could be overwhelming at times. The second best practice is the payment of fees for review of these proposals. The government of Chile has set up fees that must be paid by these USP proponents before their proposals can be reviewed. And this has been helpful in a number of ways. One, it has reduced the number of low quality as well as unserious, unsolicited proposals. The next is the centralized USP submission. Chile, being a very centralized country, has taken up a centralized USP submission. And this has been very, very important because it has assured that the USPs that are approved are actually in line with the national plans, in line with the national objectives, and has also ensured accountability, transparency, as well as preventing the need to build capacity in multiple locations. The setting up of clear evaluation criteria and a number of procedures during the evaluation phase or process is also another best practice in the government of Chile. And this has been set up to enable the public agencies focus on projects which are in line with the public interest, with the public needs, and also this has helped the Ministry of Public Works to assess these USPs. Last but not least, the two-stage submission process is another best practice. This has been used to avoid the government of Chile from investing in low-quality proposals, proposals that do not meet the government's set priorities, proposals that are not in line with the objectives of the government, or even with the other projects in the pipeline of the government. This has been very, very cost-effective, given the fact that all these low-quality and solicited proposals are actually eliminated at the first stage of evaluation.
My name is SSENABULYA Christian, and I'm pursuing an MBA course at the Benda Management Institute in Uganda. And I will quickly delve into my session where I will look at the Asian Development Bank's experience in managing USPs and insights from the PP unit of the Ministry of Finance, Uganda. The Asian bloc went through a financial crisis, and they felt fit with the economic recovery after the Asian financial crisis. There was renewed interest in PPs on the part of governments, investors, and developers, particularly from an increased number of local companies. At the Asian Development Bank, I solicited the proposals for PP and managed based on the criteria defined by the following dimensions. Strategic positioning. This criteria considers the quality of the strategic approach, sequencing, and linkages with other operations, selectivity, effort level, and aid coordination. The other one is relevance. Asian Development Bank assistance is aligned with government strategies, development needs, and best practices. Effectiveness, the other one. This criterion considers the extent to which anticipated project outcomes can be achieved by assessing technical feasibility of the project. Sustainability, and this assesses the likelihood of a project outcomes being maintained. Impact and additionality, and this assesses the level of follow-on transactions the economic impact of supported PPP transactions and approaches, improvement in PP capacity, and Asian Development Bank value addition. ADB performance, this assesses staff expertise, resource levels and deployment, consultant performance, internal coordination, quality and quantity of PP research, and responsiveness. Now I look at what is happening at the Ministry of Finance in the PP unit and how it handles USPs. The management of unsolicited proposals by the PP unit, the Ministry of Finance in Uganda, is guided by the PP Act 2015, Section 34, and they use the following criteria. The project must be strategically aligned with other sectors. The project proposal must satisfy the objectives of the National Development Plan. The infrastructure or service to be provided under the project should involve an innovative design. The infrastructure or service to be provided under the project should present a new and cost-effective method of service delivery. The proposal is subjected to competitive bidding. And now the advice we get or insights we get for the PP unit from the Asian Development Bank. The guidelines for handling of USPs by the PP unit is in some extent in line with the guidelines of handling USPs by the Asian Development Bank. For instance, both the ADB and PP unit guidelines point out that USPs should be rated on the basis of strategic positioning with other sectors of the economy. Both guidelines require that USPs be evaluated on the basis of relevance as regards the country development needs as stipulated in the National Development Plan. Both guidelines emphasize competitiveness through competitive bidding. But there are some loopholes in the PP unit, and these are the following loopholes. There is less focus on the cost effectiveness of the project. There's less focus on the project's value addition. There's also less focus on project sustainability. There's less focus on the overall performance of the Ministry of Finance. So the weaknesses mentioned above are attributed to the following. There's lack of institutional capacity to evaluate the cost effectiveness of the projects. There is weak governance systems that curb corruption. This is not well laid out in their report. Unclear or unsuitable rules and regulations that can resolve the conflict of interest. So in conclusion, we propose the following. The private sector participation through USPs requires an enabling economic, policy, legal, regulatory, and institutional environment. This environment can be created by the PP unit through enhancing institutional capacity to evaluate the cost effectiveness of the project through training and judicial systems. Strengthening government systems to curb corruption through corporate governance. Formulation of clear and suitable rules and regulations that can resolve conflict of interest. Furthermore, enhance of uptake of USPs. The PIP unit at the Ministry of Finance should guide project proponents on the following: strategic positioning of the USP, advise proponents to align projects with the key priority sectors of the economy. Enhancing relevance through advising proponents to align their project objectives with the goals of the National Development Plan. Enhance effectiveness through ensuring high technical and economic feasibility of the projects. And foster value addition through including economic and financial internal rate of returns. Enhance project sustainability by incorporating sustainability mechanisms. Thank you very much for paying attention.
I'm TUHAIRWE Sandra, and I'm going to present to you the experience in Australia and in handling unsolicited proposals, and particularly we shall look at the Australian Capital Territory. So which we are going to call the ACT government throughout this presentation. So the ACT government uses a phased process to handle unsolicited proposals, and it is mainly managed by the Infrastructure, Finance and Capital Works Division, and this is usually directed under the direction of the Unsolicited Proposals Steering Committee. And this committee is mainly composed of senior officials from the public service. So throughout the evaluation of unsolicited proposals, they use these guiding principles. One, they look at public interest, and this tells us whether the unsolicited proposal satisfies any community need. Secondly, they look at whether it's appropriate for government investment. For example, whether it's going to affect the competitive principles within society or to displace private sector activity. They also look at strategic priority, and this is to make sure that the unsolicited proposal is in line with the government's strategic objectives. They also look at value for money. They also look at affordability to make sure that it's within the government's budget, and also appropriate risk and cost allocation. We also have feasibility, whereby they look at whether the proposal is actually commercially, practically, and technically feasible. And lastly, they look at the capability and the experience of the proponent to make sure that they can actually handle the project that they are proposing. Yes. So these guidelines they are found in the partnership and framework for the ACT, and this guideline has both the guidelines for the general PPPs and then also for unsolicited proposals. And the aim of the unsolicited proposal guidelines is to ensure that the proponents submit unique and innovative ideas which the government may not be able to do on its own, but still ensuring that those ideas are within, ensure value for money and are within the government's strategic objectives. So we go to the process. So from the flow diagram there, it is a summary of the process. So it has 3 phases, but before those phases, there is an optional pre-proposal meeting with the IFCW and with the other public officers, and this is highly recommended because it's a meeting between the proponent and the government, and it helps to clarify the expectations of both the government and the proponent. And it also helps to assess the feasibility of the proposal before the proponent can go ahead to invest a lot of resources in coming up with a more detailed USP and doing the feasibility studies, because all that is very expensive. So though it's optional, it's usually recommended that the proponents undergo this pre-proposal meeting. So for those who do not undergo that meeting, the very first step is phase 1, which is concept submission. So under concept submission, it gives an opportunity for the proponent to present their concept to the senior officials within the government through a very transparent system. Now here, under concept submission, the proponent submission should include some of these details. One, it should have a cover letter, it should have a signed declaration to abide by the process, which is very well stipulated in this guideline, and then it should have a concept submission and a signed public declaration. Now, these guidelines have gone ahead to give templates for most of these documents. So the proponent just has to fill in those documents. This makes it very clear to the proponent. They know what to submit and the kind of details to include in their submission. Yes, so in the concept submission, it should specify the proposal's merits and viability and the proponent's preferred tender method. So all this has to come out clear right from the start. The proponent has to tell the committee exactly how the advantages of taking on their proposals and how they will be able to undertake their capability and viability to undertake that proposal, as well as their preferred tender method. As we shall see later, the government may come into, they have the final say in which tender model is going to be used, but the proponent is allowed to suggest their preferred method. So now this initial assessment is done by the IFCW, and it is usually to ensure that the process is stopped early enough before the government and the proponent put in a lot of resources. So yes, and the criteria used is what we have looked at the start of this presentation. From this phase, if the proposal passes this phase, it will go to phase 2, which is detailed submission. And here, the government assesses the detailed business case and the other details that are provided by the proponent. And here, the proponent is required to provide as much detail to enable the government make a more informed decision about the proposal. So the detailed submission should include some of these details. Though in the guideline, there are more details, more than this. So first of all, it should include the objectives of the USP, its unique features, the nature and extent of the anticipated outcomes, alignment with government policy, the preferred tender model, and the justification. Some requirements that will enable the government to carry out a value for money analysis, and this may include the net economic benefit or the cost of the USP on the public, the required use of government assets in case the USP will require using some of the existing government assets, and the proponent's financial capacity, and many other details. And all this has also actually been provided for in the guideline. It's very well stipulated what the proponent should, the kind of information that they should supply. So at this stage, the final decision to proceed with the USP is made by the cabinet, not just the steering committee, but it goes to the cabinet, and they are guided by recommendations from the steering committee. the Unsolicited Proposals Steering Committee. So once a person passes this stage, they will go to phase 3, which is the tender. And this phase, it includes the formal procurement of the USP up to the execution of the contract. So it includes selection of the appropriate tender model, the tender process itself, and negotiation of the contract for implementing the USP, and then eventually execution of the contract. So, as we had seen earlier, the proponent may propose their preferred tender model, but the final say, the government has the final say. They will choose the final model to use, which is to their to the best of their interests. Though in a case where a competitive tender process is chosen, the government usually gives the same information to all bidders, and all the other bidders other than the proponent are given adequate time to develop their bids. So it allows for transparency in the process, that the proponent is not given an advantage over the other bidders. So this is a summary of the preferred tender models and their applicability. So the default and most preferred model is the open tender, and here the government undertakes a fully competitive public tender process that is used for the other proposals which are not the solicited proposals. And this is supported by their Procurement Act, the Government Procurement Act, which requires that government should undertake competitive open tenders. But in cases where the proponent wants another model, then they are allowed to propose it, as we saw earlier, but they are supposed to give sound justification that will convince the government to actually take on their proposed model. So the second one, the other applicability of open tender is when the proposal is not unique and there are other people in the market who can actually deliver the same proposal. Then we have the Swiss challenge. We saw all this in the beginning, the earlier slides. The Swiss challenge here, it's also a competitive tender process. In the Swiss challenge, if initially the proponent is not successful, they are given the option to match the winning bid and actually take on the proposal. And the applicability is also, it is where the proposal is likely to be unique, and but there is also still potential for market alternatives. And it's also a default model for unsolicited proposals that justify an exemption from a public tender. Then we have the bid premium. It's also a competitive tender process, but the proponent is given a bonus during the bid evaluation. And this might be either an addition of bonus points to the proponent's technical offer, or it may be a discount to their financial offer. And this is applied where the proposal is likely to be unique, but there are also potential market alternatives. And it acknowledges first mover advantage of the proponent. It acknowledges that actually the proponent was the first one to declare such a proposal to the government, so they are given a bonus for that. We have developer fee. Here the government undertakes a competitive tender process, and the winning bidder, if it is not the proponent, reimburses the proponent's pre-agreed development costs. So here, in this kind of model, whoever wins the bid, and if they are not the proponent, then they are required to reimburse the proponent a certain amount of development fees. And this is applied where the proposal is likely to be unique, but there are market alternatives, and there is also perceived potential for market alternatives. Then we also have the development manager. This is usually used where the proponent does not have full life cycle delivery capability. They are not able to deliver the project, the whole project. So they need other people to come in. And it's also where the proposal is likely to be unique. So here, the proponent acts as a development manager, conducting one or more transparent procurement processes for different components of the implementation of its proposal and receiving a pre-agreed return. So they go on to procure different people to take on different parts of their proposal so that it's fully executed. And then lastly, we have contestable negotiations. This is where the government goes into direct negotiations with the proponent. So here there is it's not a competitive process. They just go into a direct negotiation with the proponent and finalize the proposal. And this is applicable where the proposal is very unique and there is also no market alternative. So as we have seen, the preferred tender models that are used by the ACT government allow for competition and they offer incentives to the proponents and incentives which encourage proponents to submit more USPs. In my opinion, this phased process actually leads best practices in managing USPs as it promotes fairness, transparency, consistency, as well as realization of value for money because of the competition that is created by these models.
I'm ASHA NAGAWA, and I'm going to present about World Bankers' experience in handling unsolicited proposals. World Bankers created a four-stage process for handling USPs, which includes submission, evaluation, project development, and project procurement. Under submission, there is project identification as per government development plans, and then the PP unit under the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development in regards to Uganda. Stage 2 is about evaluation. The USPs are verified to check whether they meet the evaluation criteria. There is also requisition for evidence for the proponent's qualifications and past experience. There is project evaluation, which includes benchmarking with past similar projects and also market testing. There is also disclosure of relevant project documents, determination of most appropriate project development and procurement method, which may be open bidding or restricted domestic bidding. Stage 3, there is project development. Under project development, the public agent structures the USP and undertakes project development with its external advisors. There is also signing of the development agreement with the USP proponent. Project evaluation and disclosure of relevant documents, and finally it confirms the most appropriate project procurement method. Lastly, it does project procurement. Under project procurement, there is securing of project development resources, drafting of PPP contracts, environmental and social impact assessment clearance, development of appropriate procurement solicitation documents that are to be used in bidding. Agency undertakes competitive tendering or direct negotiation with the USP proponent. However, this kind of method may limit competition if used. The resigning of the PPP contract with the proponent if the proposal has been successful. There is also contract management in the final stages of the procurement of the project, which includes setting up an administrative structure, managing and monitoring of PPP delivery track and risks, and also dealing with changes. Under best practices to consider while handling USP according to World Bank, there is establishment of USP enabling environment, which includes creating PPP regulatory and policy framework for USPs, should follow international best practices. There should be an institutional organization to govern both publicly and privately initiated PPPs. There is also development of human capacity for the public officials who will be handling the unsolicited proposals. The second best practice is about listing the objectives of the SPs. The government should consider transparency in listing the objectives, and also all the submitted proposals should align with the government's infrastructure, priorities and development plans through using the National Development Plan of Phase 3. It should also endeavor to identify clear possible objectives. Another practice should be that the government should take upon. The government should incorporate the best guiding principles of USP policies, which include public interest, value for money, affordability, fair market pricing, and transparency and accountability. They should also provide a high-level policy decision. The government should decide whether to accept USPs through doing due diligence, protection of public interest during evaluation, and also allow transparency. Government should determine the extent to which it will define the parameters of USPs, and also it should allow to decide to incorporate the USP policy in its existing regulatory framework. It should also determine the extent to which the private proponent should be involved in the project development by either the public agency developing its own project or involving the USP proposer and also its public officials to do the development of the project. The government should also decide on an appropriate procurement method to use. It may be either direct negotiation with the USP provider or through open bidding. Recommendations to the PP unit, that's Uganda. There is need to establish appropriate institutions and processes to implement the PPP Policy Framework 2010 and PPP Act 2015. The government should also prohibit or restrict PPPs in any matters of national defense and security. It should also allocate sufficient resources for the project preparation and capacity development of the government officials. The government should also establish a competitive procedure before and after the USP proposition to allow the project to arrive at a fair market price. It should also develop minimum requirements for submission of USPs, focusing on technical capacity and a proven track record of the private proponent. There should be protection of intellectual property rights, as well as provision of incentives and compensations to the USPs proponents that have not been successful. The government should initiate all future projects themselves and later establish public sector buy-in in order to prevent over-relying on the private sector. Thank you for listening.
We shall look at the tips to the PPP unit in Uganda on developing guidelines for handling of USPs. So first of all, a USP guideline or policy allows governments to articulate their policy on USPs. It clearly defines what constitutes an acceptable USP. It defines the conditions and procedures that need to be followed and lays out the roles and mandates of the different agencies and institutions throughout the USP process. And it establishes a clear, consistent, and transparent USP policy. So the USP policy or guideline allows the governments to articulate their policy on USPs, and it clearly tells the proponents and all the procedures to be followed and the roles and responsibilities of the different stakeholders. And having such a policy has several advantages, and these include private sector interest, transparency, public interest, as we have already seen in earlier presentations. So this is the status of USPs in Uganda. This is the status of USPs in Uganda. We have the contracting authority, which is required to evaluate USPs in terms of their uniqueness and to demonstrate that the USPs and the procuring authority also examines the potential contribution of the USP to the strategic objectives of the government development plan. And however, there are no standardized PPP model contracts. We look at the procedure for implementing USPs by the PPP unit. These are some of the considerations that should be made by the PPP unit before drafting their USP guidelines. One, the unit should ensure that there is a USP enabling environment, and this includes an effective regulatory framework. And right now, yes, the PPP Act supports USPs. That's something on USPs. And then they should also have institutional and human capacity and clear responsibilities in handling USPs. And this also includes institutional structures, as we've seen in earlier presentations. Different countries have different bodies that are handling USPs, and the same should be done by the PPP. Secondly, the unit should articulate the purpose to provide clarity and consistency to any parties in the USP submission, and should provide clear objectives of their USP policy. And this can be anything like increasing innovative solutions in infrastructure projects, or increasing the number of viable projects. Yes, so the guideline or the policy should have a clear objective, and that should be stated. Then they should establish clear guiding principles to ensure that the guideline actually results into projects that are of public benefit and affordable to the government. And these principles have been mentioned and are being used by most of the countries we've looked at, and these include public interest, value for money, affordability, alignment of the PPP with the government strategic objectives, and then USP procedures and transparency and accountability. Then they should also determine the procurement methods and incentives to be used, and competitive tendering is highly recommended. But then also they can also undertake direct negotiations with the proponent depending on the situation. For example, we saw earlier where the proposal is very unique and there are no other alternatives on the market, they can go ahead and do direct negotiation. Now, the considerations to be taken by the PPP unit at each stage of the USP process when they are coming up with their guideline. So under submission, they need to specify and standardize the mandatory documentation and the information to be submitted. And this is to ensure quality proposals. So they can even go ahead and make templates, as we saw in earlier presentations in some countries like in Australia, where they have templates for each of the documents that is required to be submitted. So they may also consider centralization of the submissions, and this is to minimize coordination challenges. They should also have a criteria for assessing the proponent's capability. This is the financial capability, technical capability, and all that. Then they should also check, they should have a step for checking compliance of the USP submission before more detailed evaluation. Now this is to save everyone's resources, both the government and the proponent, so that they do not proceed with a proposal that will not yield to the requirements that have been put in place. And under evaluation, you should have a clear evaluation criteria, and this may include some of the principles, the guiding principles we've already seen: public interest, project feasibility, suitability, affordability. So all that should be put into consideration. And disclosing information about the project to the public should be considered to ensure accountability to the public. So at some point in the evaluation, some of this information has to be disclosed to the public for accountability. And under the procurement stage, they may make reference to the existing PPP procurement procedures, or they should define the USP-specific tender procedures to ensure transparency and competition. And this can include some of the methods we've already seen, open tender or the Swiss challenge, or depending on the proposal that they are handling, or direct negotiation. And they should provide appropriate incentives for the proponents, which will not distort the competition, because some of the disadvantages of the incentives is that it distorts the competition that should actually help in coming up with a project that ensures value for money. So the incentives should not distort the competition. And then they should also ensure that they provide sufficient time and bidding information to the competing bidders to prepare their bids. So the other bidders, other than the proponent, should be given all the information that they need, as well as sufficient time.
Once again, my name is Jude Benda, Matsiko, and I'm going to present the recommendations to the 3P unit in Uganda as far as handling of USP is concerned. First of all, we think and feel that the 3P unit in Uganda should consider submission of the USP. Like our previous presenters have said, the submission should be more detailed with the specific objectives of the proposal that the authority or the 3P unit should look at. Also, the 3P unit should evaluate the proposal based on a number of aspects as per the minimum evaluation criteria that has been applicable to the proponents or the proposers. And so, if the 3P unit or the authority decides to reject the USP, it notifies the authorized representative of the proponent and ensures that the institution does not make any use of the intellectual property or the proprietary data in the USP, and returns to the proponent all the documents that were received from the USP. And we think that also that the authority, if they decide to consider the USP, it confirms such a decision in writing to the proponent. Also, the 3P unit should conduct a comprehensive evaluation of the USP in line with the requirements for the assessment of PPPs or non-PPPs in an appropriate regulation, including an independent feasibility study. We don't just accept, but we can do an independent feasibility study to make sure that what we are taking on is economically viable and feasible. If the authority decides to proceed with the USP, it must negotiate with the USP agreement with the proponent to guide the process and establish what the methodology of determining any cost to be reimbursed to the proponent should the procurement process result in an award of a party than the proponent. 2, the procedure for further developing the project, the allocation of responsibility for developing the documents, and the purchase of the intellectual property rights, if any. The agreement will also establish in the information in the USP must be treated as confidential as possible. Now, if the USP agreement is closed, then the authority must prepare and issue a bid document to the proponent and even opening it up to the public. The authority issues a request for qualification to test the market for the existence of other private entities that are capable of providing the product or service. If there is no adequate response through the RFQ, the authority prepares a draft contract for the provision of the product or service. That is, if we have failed to get some other people to respond to our request for proposal, therefore we just go and through negotiation we draft a contract for the provision of this product or service. Now, if there are one or more adequate responses to the RFQ, the authority prepares a request for proposal, RFP, with a draft contract. Now, the authority will conduct a competitive bidding process. This is to allow transparency and accountability and to ensure that we get something, we get a contractor or a proposer that is worth dealing with. The authority reimburses the proponent, just like our previous presenter was talking about the developer's fee. The authority should consider reimbursing the proponent should the proponent not be awarded, so that his developer's fees are paid by the winning proposer or the winning contractor. For highly innovative concepts, the protection of intellectual property is an important point of attention. So, for those proposals that have high innovation concepts in them, the protection of the intellectual property should be very important and should be paid a lot of attention. And we think there is no need to avoid the competitive process because of the intellectual products. So we are recommending that the process of getting a USP should be highly competitive in the first place, so that we avoid this issue of corruption. Nevertheless, there should be a continuous refinement of existing USP framework to enhance its effectiveness and improve the competitive environment. These are the references that we followed or we reviewed while we are compiling our presentation. I want to thank you for listening to us and thank you for watching.